In the spring of 1856, when the ground was still cold and the wind smelled of iron from the nearby foundries, a wagon creaked into the valley outside Chillicothe, Ohio. It carried the Beechworth family, a husband, a wife, and 2 quiet sons, and behind it, a rattling load of wood and iron. The people in town said they were building something good, a home for the unwanted children of the region, in a time when poverty spread faster than any illness that sounded like salvation. By summer, the Beechworth Orphan Asylum stood on the hill. The house was big and white, with symmetrical windows and a black roof that glistened after rain. Local carpenters helped raise its frame, but the family worked the longest hours themselves. The father, Elias, was tall, slow-speaking, a man who could fix anything made of wood or bone. His wife, Margaret, ran the kitchen and kept a small chapel room filled with flowers, even in the dead of winter. She said she wanted the children to feel God's warmth. At first, the town adored them. Donations arrived, food, wool, old books. Sunday sermons praised their charity. The children who came to the home looked cleaner, healthier. Their laughter could be heard when the wind carried uphill. No one noticed that the laughter thinned as the months passed. When a merchant's daughter vanished near the river, the sheriff knocked on every door. Elias helped with the search and even led a prayer vigil. The girl was never found. People told each other that such things happened in a growing state. Accidents, wanderers, wolves. Yet the rumor began that strange lights were seen at the Beechworth property long after midnight. That sometimes a cry would echo from the hill and stop as if the earth itself had swallowed it. Inside the house, the children followed rules that sounded holy but felt strange. They were told to eat in silence, to keep journals of their dreams, to confess even the smallest lies to Mother Margaret. The youngest ones said the walls whispered at night. No one outside the orphanage believed them. One autumn, a traveling preacher visited to give blessings. He left before dawn, pale and shaking. He never told anyone why. He simply refused to take the hill road again. Winter came. Snow covered the yard and muffled every sound. When spring thawed the ground, a farmer found small carvings in the trees near the property. Crosses, circles, and a single word carved again and again in a child's hand. Remember. By the next year, townsfolk began to notice that the number of children at the Beechworth Orphanage never seemed to grow, though new ones arrived each month. Elias said they were adopted quickly, given to good families. The sheriff kept a list of those names, but none could be traced. Still, no one dared accuse the family. They were too kind, too calm. The orphanage sat like a bright tooth on the hill, shining even as the rest of the town dimmed under smoke and fear. Then, in 1858, a flood washed through the valley and tore away part of the lower field. In the mudslide, something surfaced behind the house. A cellar door no one knew existed, older than the rest of the building. The townspeople came to help, but Elias insisted they leave it sealed until the water dried. That night, the last of the lanterns in the orphanage went dark, one by one, and no one saw them again until morning. When daylight came, the house looked the same. Children played in the yard, smiling, waving, but those who saw them swore that none of the faces were familiar. The spring of 1858 was strange in Chillicothe. The river receded, but a heaviness lingered in the air, the kind that made people lower their voices when speaking of the hill. The Beechworth Orphanage was still standing, still immaculate, but no one had seen Elias or Margaret in town for months. Deliveries left on the porch went uncollected until nightfall. One morning, a school teacher named Clara Holt climbed the hill to bring new books for the children. She swore she heard humming from inside, a soft, tuneless murmur. But when she knocked, the sound stopped. The door opened by itself just an inch, enough for her to see candlelight flickering deep in the hallway. She called out for Margaret. No one answered. Clara left the books and hurried back down the hill, but something compelled her to look back once. In an upstairs window, she saw a child's face, pale, expressionless, eyes too wide for the light. Then the curtain fell. A few days later, heavy rain returned. The old cellar door the flood had exposed began to leak dark water into the lower fields. The sheriff sent 2 men to investigate. They pried it open and found a staircase that went down farther than any route should go. The men didn't return. By dusk, a search party was organized. Townsfolk carrying lanterns, the sheriff leading. When they descended into the opening, the air was damp and smelled of copper and ash. The stairs ended in a long corridor braced with timber, as if someone had tried to keep the earth itself from collapsing in. Along the walls were carvings, childlike drawings scratched into stone, sons' hands' names. The sheriff counted 12 rooms branching off the passage, each smaller than the last. Inside were old beds, empty bowls, and pages of journals written in tiny, shaky handwriting. Every entry ended the same way. Mother says we will be new again. When the searchers emerged, pale and trembling, they brought with them a single book, Margaret Beechworth's own ledger. It listed the names of all the children who had ever arrived at the orphanage. The final page ended mid-sentence, the ink still fresh. That night, the town gathered in the church. The priest spoke of evil and deliverance, but no one listened. They all kept looking up toward the hill, where lights glowed in the windows again, brighter than they should have been. A storm rolled in. Thunder broke over the valley, and as the wind rose, the orphanage caught fire. Sudden, complete. No one saw who lit it. Some said lightning struck the roof. Others swore they saw Elias himself, standing in the yard, holding a lantern, smiling as the flames took everything. By morning, the orphanage was gone. Nothing but ash and blackened stone. But in the ruins they found prints in the soot, small, bare feet leading away from the site and vanishing into the forest. For years afterward, travelers claimed they saw children by the roadside near Chillicothe, always in pairs, always silent. They'd ask for directions to the orphanage as if it still stood. When told it had burned, they'd look confused and whisper, "But Mother's waiting." The Beechworth name was never spoken again in town records. The field where the orphanage stood was left to grow wild, and nothing ever built there stayed upright for long. And yet, on some nights when the fog comes low across the valley, locals still say you can see the outline of the building, lit from within, windows glowing. A shadow of what once was, a warning to anyone who dares to offer salvation in the name of love. And find something else staring back. By 1873, nearly 2 decades had passed since the Beechworth orphanage burned to the ground. Time had begun to smooth the edges of the story. People moved on, new families settled in the valley, and the town of Chillicothe pretended that the hill had always been empty. But there are always those who cannot let a story die. Professor Ambrose Keene was one of them, a historian from Cincinnati, known for his obsession with moral anomalies in early American settlements. When he arrived in Chillicothe, he was already a figure of fascination and unease. Tall, pale, with eyes that looked as though they'd read too much of the wrong kind of history. He had heard the whispers of the Beechworth's orphanage. He'd read the fragments of newspaper articles that still survived. Strange tragedy in Ross County. Unholy flames consume orphan asylum. What intrigued him most wasn't the fire, nor even the missing children. It was that no official records existed of Elias or Margaret Beechworth before 1849. It was as if they had appeared from nowhere, founded an institution, and vanished again. Keane rented a small room in the town and began his work. He interviewed the elderly, those who still remembered the fire. He scoured courthouse basements for birth registries, and he spent long nights on the hill, setting lanterns among the ruins, tracing foundations half swallowed by weeds. He soon noticed something strange. The soil beneath the hill was not natural. It had been turned, layered, packed, as if the entire site had once been dug out and filled again. When he dug deeper, he found small fragments of porcelain, rusted hinges, and once the corner of a child's shoe. Keane wrote in his field journal that he began hearing what he called resonant hums near the hill after dusk. Low vibrations that seemed to come from the ground itself. The locals told him it was just the wind traveling through hollow caverns beneath the fields. But Keane didn't believe it. He invited a local minister, Reverend Giles, to accompany him one night. The two men climbed the hill and stood where the orphanage had once stood, their lamps trembling in the fog. Keane asked the Reverend to read aloud from scripture, but when he did, the light of their lamps flickered. The hum grew louder, rhythmic now like a pulse. The Reverend dropped his Bible. It fell open to a page that read, "And the earth opened her mouth and swallowed them up." By the time they returned to town, Reverend Giles was nearly incoherent. He refused to speak of what he'd seen again and left Chillicothe within the week. Keane stayed. He claimed his research was almost finished, that he was close to understanding the truth. In a letter to his colleague, he wrote, "They were not a family in the ordinary sense. They were guardians of a threshold, and the children were not victims, but vessels." 2 days after that letter was sent, Keane vanished. His lodging was found empty, his papers scattered. The only thing left was his journal, open to a page smeared with mud. The final entry read, "I heard them in the soil tonight. The children are still singing." After Keane's disappearance, the townspeople begged the county to block access to the hill. Fences were built, the path overgrown. But stories continued. Hunters claimed to find small footprints in the mud after rain. The scent of smoke sometimes drifted through the trees, even when the air was still. And then there was the strangest account. A farmer named Lionel Burke, who lived 3 miles east of the ruins. In 1881, he reported that a young girl had knocked on his door at midnight. She wore an old-fashioned dress, her hair tied in a ribbon gone grey with dust. She said her name was Clara, and that she'd lost her brothers in the storm. When Burke went to fetch his lantern, she was gone. But on the windowsill he found a page torn from a ledger, one of the Beechworth Orphanage records. And there on the bottom of the list was her name, Clara Beechworth. The implication was impossible. Elias and Margaret had never listed a daughter, unless she was born after the fire. By 1892, most of the old generation in Chillicothe was gone. The fire, the disappearances, Even Professor Keen's vanishing were little more than campfire tales told to frighten children. But stories like that have a way of surviving long after truth rots away. That autumn, the hill changed hands. A railway investor named Henry Tolliver bought the land with plans to build a depot and workers' housing. He had no patience for local superstition. "It's dirt and trees," he told the town council. "Ghosts don't pay taxes." Within a month, surveyors were back on the hill. They brought chains, shovels, and laughter. At first the work went well, but the deeper they dug, the more the laughter died. Under a few feet of soil, they found what they thought were roots. Dozens of them, pale and wiry. When one man tugged at a strand, it snapped like bone. A closer look showed they weren't roots at all, but long braids of hair. The dig was halted. Tolliver dismissed the finding as a trick of decay, but the men refused to continue. They said the air under the soil was too warm, that it moved when you breathed it in. That night, the foreman stayed behind to guard the site. He kept a journal, a habit from his army days, and wrote that he felt watched as soon as the others left. "There's a smell like iron and candle wax," he wrote, "and something moves where there shouldn't be wind." He never finished the entry. By morning he was gone. The only sign of him was his lantern, still burning in the middle of the field. Henry Tolliver was furious. He called for more men, doubled their pay, and ordered the project to continue. "We'll clear it all," he said. "Every inch." By noon they struck something hard beneath the earth, a foundation of blackened stone. It was the old orphanage cellar, sealed by time. Tolliver descended with 2 men and torches. The smell was overwhelming, damp and metallic. Inside, the air shimmered with heat, though the stones were cold. The walls were carved with names, hundreds of them, some crossed out, others newly etched as if someone had been adding to them. Tolliver raised his torch and froze. Standing in the far corner was a girl, barefoot, her dress the color of ash, her face pale as milk. She smiled. When they returned to the surface, only one of the 3 men remained. His name was Samuel Pike, and he was incoherent, eyes wide and glassy. He kept repeating the same thing. She said her name was Clara. She said Mother is building again. The project ended that day. Tolliver abandoned the land and left Ohio. Pike spent the rest of his life in an asylum, where he drew the same picture over and over, a large house with too many windows, and children standing in front of it with no faces. The story of Clara Beechworth spread again through Chillicothe. Some said she was a spirit, others a curse, but a few whispered something worse, that she was flesh and blood, born of the fire, never aging, always waiting for someone to reopen what the flames had closed. In 1901, a photograph surfaced. It showed a group of children standing outside a church in Dayton, Ohio. Among them was a girl in a faded dress, her eyes dark and knowing. A note on the back of the photograph read, "Clara, age 11, new arrival from Ross County." The date on the photo matched the year the Beechworth Orphanage had burned. Exactly 45 years earlier, the church that took the picture no longer exists. It burned to the ground the same year. By 1910, the Beechworth Orphanage had become a ghost story told around Ohio firesides, a tale to frighten the curious and keep children from wandering too far into the woods. But in every old myth, there's someone who needs to know why it exists. that someone was Dr. Edwin Mallory, a folklorist from Chicago. He was known for his calm voice and his obsession with recurring geographies of fear, places where evil seemed to loop through time. When he heard about the Beechworth Hill, he called it a perfect experiment in historical residue. Mallory arrived in Chillicothe that winter. He brought recording equipment, notebooks, and a small metal case of instruments meant for soil analysis. He wanted to prove that the stories, the humming ground, the lights, the footprints were natural phenomena. Science, he believed, could wash away superstition. The locals refused to go near the site with him. He went alone. His field recordings, later found in his office, captured his voice clearly for the first few hours, the crunch of frost, the rustle of weeds. But as night fell, another sound joined his narration, a rhythmic whisper, faint, layered, like children repeating a lullaby backwards. Mallory's voice faltered. He said, "I believe it's the wind, though it seems to respond to my movement." He began describing the ground temperature, warmer than expected, and then paused. A minute of silence. Then faintly, "There are impressions in the soil, small ones, like the outline of hands." The recording ended abruptly. Mallory's assistant, who came looking for him the next morning, found the equipment exactly where it had been placed, the microphone still recording static. In the distance, the hill looked as undisturbed as ever. But near the base, the assistant noticed something odd. The grass was flattened in the shape of a doorway. He also found Mallory's journal, soaked through by dew. Most of the writing was smeared, but one page was legible. It read, "They were never meant to be saved. They were kept. The Beechworths opened something, and the children were its echo." No one ever found Mallory. Not his body, not his belongings. But weeks later, the same metal case he'd brought for soil samples appeared in the lobby of a library in Columbus. Perfectly clean, his name engraved. Inside, only a single thing, a lock of hair tied with a grey ribbon. The library staff sent it to the university. The forensic study that followed is still cited in obscure journals for its anomaly. The hair contained traces of two distinct genetic sequences, one belonging to a girl approximately 10 years old, the other something older, much older. By the 1920s, the Beechworth land was fenced again, declared unsafe for development due to unstable subsurface conditions. But sometimes, travelers heading north along the rail line swear they see a single candle burning where the orphanage once stood. And if you listen closely enough, in that brief, breathless moment before the train passes, you can almost hear children laughing, not happily, not cruelly, just endlessly. The laughter of those who never left the hill. Because in the end, the Beechworths weren't murderers in the way history defines it. They were caretakers of something beneath the soil, something that still waits for new names to be written on the stone walls below. And every few years, another family moves near Chillicothe, another child disappears, and another story begins. So if you ever find yourself in southern Ohio and the air suddenly feels too still, if you see a flicker of light in the distance or hear faint humming in the ground beneath your feet, don't look toward it. Don't follow the sound. Just keep walking, because not every orphanage burns down completely. Some just change what they're made of. You've been listening to Liturgy of Dread, where every shadow has a story and every whisper remembers a name. If this tale chilled you, don't forget to subscribe, like and share, so others can descend into the dark with you. And tell us in the comments, would you go up the hill?